welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Outreach and International Affairs conversation on racism, justice, and community resilience. We're wearing masks due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is our new norm at Virginia Tech to remind people to wear face coverings and take care of each other and stay healthy. Everyone in this webinar is in a private space, so please remove your mask if you're in a safe location. Please remember to wear a mask if you're not able to physically distance. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elisa Christie. I serve as Director of Women and Gender in International Development at the Center for International Research, Education, and Development within Outreach and International Affairs. I'm also the Inclusive ET representative for Outreach and International Affairs, and I help guide OIA's inclusion and diversity initiatives. This webinar today is part of Inclusive ET Week at Virginia Tech. We have over 400 people registered for the webinar, including over 100 of our own OIA employees. So thank you all for joining us. I've asked Leland to help me. I wanted you to see the link to the Inclusive ET event. So that should show up in the chat. There you go. A lot of interesting activities that have started today, yesterday. So we're coming out of an overwhelming summer with the tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, the shooting of Jacob Blake, and deadly violence and unrest in Kenosha and other cities and towns across the country. We've also been witness to the ongoing disproportionate impact of the pandemic and systemic racism on communities of color. On June 5th, in the wake of George Floyd's killing and the ensuing national unrest, and in preparation for celebrating Juneteenth, Dr. Mena Pratt-Clark, Virginia Tech's VP for Strategic Affairs and Diversity, and Dr. Michelle DeRamo, the Assistant Provost for Diversity Education, led an unfinished conversation on race and called on folks throughout Virginia Tech to engage in courageous conversations and take action to address systemic racism. You can watch that and the other unfinished conversations on race, including the one they did today at noon at this link. They're recorded, they're on the Inclusive ET page. So Outreach and International Affairs, like most units across campus, heeded the call. We embarked on a series of conversations and other activities throughout our units. We developed several new initiatives, including this OIA Conversations on Racism, Justice, and Community Resilience. As President Sands said earlier this week when he kicked off Inclusive ET at Virginia Tech, taking time to consider how each of us can foster a more inclusive Virginia Tech is more important than ever. So I wanted to say this webinar is the first in a series of conversations being planned for the academic year. OIA aims to create a safe space for difficult or courageous conversations, learning, and dialogue surrounding systemic racism in our communities in the Commonwealth and the globe. This first panel includes experts on race and justice in Virginia Tech and the community. The second panel will take place on November 12th, and it will be a conversation with Virginia Tech faculty from 4 different regions in Africa who will share their experience with ethnicity and race in Africa and how that shapes their understanding of racial and ethnic issues in the United States. And we'll be sending you a registration link for that, I think next week. But you can find information for that at the OIA Conversations page, which is also, you're gonna have the link in the chat. Now, we received many questions from many of you in advance of the event today, up until the early afternoon. We'll get to as many of them as we can and take questions from you that you can submit on the Q&A function in this Zoom webinar. We do apologize in advance because we won't be able to get to them all. Several questions that came in were about what Virginia Tech is doing to bring and retain people of color to campus. And to respond to that, we wanted to share a few links to Inclusive ET and to the Cultural and Community Centers for students for you to learn of the many initiatives and programs around campus for faculty, staff, and students. So there's the links for that. You can look at that. Next, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Guru Ghosh, the Vice President for Outreach and International Affairs. Dr. Ghosh is at the forefront of an administrative unit that fosters engagement initiatives, including economic development and continuing and professional education, and operates centers throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, including the Reynolds Homestead, which our moderator, Julie Walter Steele, directs. He also guides Virginia Tech's global presence and international efforts, including our Global Education Office, the Language and Culture Institute, and the Center for International Research, Education, and Development. He's been a leader promoting inclusion and diversity throughout OIA and Virginia Tech for many years. Dr. Ghosh?
Thank you, Dr. Christie. It is my privilege this afternoon to introduce a cherished colleague who has served with distinction over almost a decade in the family of Outreach and International Affairs. Soon-to-be Dr. Julie Walter Steele has spent the last 9 years as the director of the Reynolds Homestead, a former tobacco plantation which now serves as a community enrichment center in Patrick County in Virginia. Julie has over 30 years of higher education experience at Clemson, at Western Carolina, and most recently at Virginia Tech. And then for much of her career has had an extensive array of experiences in a whole host of areas pertinent to higher education. But she has always been deeply involved in diversity and inclusion activities in all of the institutions where she has served. Currently, she is pursuing her PhD in Virginia Tech's Aspect program with a fascinating research focus on how narratives at plantation museums can be expanded to include dialogues with the predominantly white visitors to plantation museums in an effort to gain visitors and help them to understand deeply the black and white power binary inherent in the institution of slavery and how it continues to be ingrained in the social structures and policies of present day times. Without further ado, I want to welcome as the moderator of this distinguished panel, Julie Walter Steele. Julie, on to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. That was a very generous introduction. I'm really humbled and honored to serve as the moderator for this panel of wisdom givers who have agreed to offer their perspectives and advice to us today. And as Maria Lee said, during the program, if you would like to pose a question, please use the question and answer box. And although we've received numerous questions, we're going to try to answer as many as possible in the time that we have. Before we get started, I think it's important to note that Virginia Tech is built on lands previously occupied by Monacan families who were driven from their homes and by men, women, and children who were torn from their homes in Africa and enslaved here. And it's this history of oppression that's led us to the conversation today. So I'd like to open up by offering a brief introduction of each of our esteemed panelists. Dr. Michael Williams received a doctorate of education at Northeastern University and currently serves as the Assistant Director of Student Success Center at Virginia Tech and serves as a scholar in residence for the NASPA Men and Masculinity Knowledge Community. He also coordinates B-Men, the Black Male Excellent Network, an initiative that's committed to assisting Black men in their identity development, academic achievement, and personal growth. Dr. Williams previously served as the director of the Gwendolyn Brooks Cultural Center at Western Illinois University and the coordinator of the Male Initiative at Norfolk University. In his work, he challenges students to move beyond their boundaries to seek true learning and understanding of the world around them. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for being here today. A veteran civil rights activist, Dr. Warnie Reed obtained his PhD in sociology at Boston University and currently serves as a professor of sociology and Africana studies and the director of the Race and Social Policy Research Center at Virginia Tech. Previously, he developed and directed social science research centers, including the William Monroe Trotter Institute at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He also directed the project Assessment of the Status of African Americans, which involved 61 scholars in the production of a 4-volume work published by Auburn House Publishers. Among his many achievements, Dr. Reed has served as the president of the National Congress of Black Faculty and the president of the Association of Black Sociologists. Dr. Reed, we're so glad to have you here. Thank you. A graduate of Radford University School of Communication and resident of Christiansburg, Virginia, Karen Jones is the editor-in-chief of Colors Virginia, a magazine which highlights issues relevant to Southwest Virginia's communities of colors. She's actively involved with organizations promoting diversity, social justice, community awareness, and she especially enjoys working with children and youth. Ms. Jones is a member of Ashbury United Methodist Church, serves on the board of the Hill School Community Center in Christiansburg, chairs the Political Action Committee of the Montgomery County, Bradford City, Floyd County NAACP, is the Assistant Secretary of the Virginia State Conference of the NAACP, and is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Thank you so much for being with us today, Ms. Jones. Dr. Brandy Faulkner is the Gloria D. Smith Professor of Africana Studies in the Department of Political Science at Virginia Tech. An award-winning faculty member, her teaching and research focus is on race and public policy and U.S. constitutional law. And she encourages her students to exceed their own expectations for learning, intellectual development, and personal growth. A recipient of the prestigious Valvoline National Caring Hands Award given to community leaders across the country engaged in exemplary youth development, Dr. Faulkner is an organizer focused on racial and economic justice. She's committed to cultivating community-based approaches to problem solving and serves on several state and national organizations dedicated to social, political, and economic change. Thank you for being here with us, Dr. Faulkner. With a master's degree in strategic intelligence from the American Military Institute, Chief Mac Babb joined Virginia Tech as the Deputy Chief of Police and Assistant Director of Security in 2015, and he was appointed Chief of Police in 2017. He leads the 68-person department and directs the development and implementation of security strategies and the coordination of security services for all Virginia Tech campuses and programs, including those overseas. An active police officer since 1990, Chief Babb previously directed the Roanoke Police Academy, supervised the Special Enforcement Investigation Units, and served as the commander of the Tactical Response Team. He's also served as an instructor with the Department of Criminal Justice Services since 1995, teaching classes on subjects such as bias-based policing and use of force. Thank you, Chief Babb, for being here with us today. So as you can see, we have a wealth of experience and expertise here today, and I'd like to start off a question with our most senior panel member. Dr. Reed, as a veteran civil rights activist and leader, I'd like to start by asking you to describe what's different about the protest we are seeing today as opposed to early protests in the civil rights movements, and what similarities we're seeing.
I see some similarities and some differences, and I'll mention a couple of each. Previously, during the height of the civil rights movement, the protests and demonstrations were more organized and more focused than now. Before, we did not have protests and demonstrations everywhere like we do now, including small towns. In fact, some towns with like 2% Black populations. We did not have that before during the height of the civil rights movement. Also, what's different now is in terms of people in the streets. More older people are involved now than before. Now, we've always had young people and old people, but it seems to me that more older people are involved. Now, some similarities. It seems to me that one of the similarities is the intensity. There can be no doubt now or then about what people were protesting and what they were, their commitment to what they were doing. So the intensity seems to be there now as it was before. Another similarity that I see is a small one, but at the time it was pretty big. What has happened after the George Floyd killing was this kind of almost spontaneous development of demonstrations and protests across the country. And people just joined in quickly and forcefully, more than would have been expected, say, the week before he was killed. This was similar to me to what happened after the freedom rides were stopped in Alabama and John Lewis had his skull cracked for the first time. And Diane Nash decided that she could not, and her compatriots, young folk, could not live and let this event or this issue stop right there. So she vowed to continue, and she organized a group of people at the risk of their lives. Their lives were so at risk that they all filled out their last will and testament, that they went to continue this. Well, what's similar to me now to then was that very next day, young people from all over the country descended on Alabama and Mississippi. So many came that they couldn't fit in all of the jails. They had to kind of build fences to hold them and so on. So it seems to me that that kind of spontaneous deluge of folk that happened way back then, but only to me, it seems in that one instance to be that large, happened this time with even more people involved. And I think that's a similarity, and I think I should just stop there.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your perspective. And I have a question. You say, as we've seen, there are so many people who are engaged now in the protest, and a lot of people have asked, what is the difference between an anti-racist and a racist, and how can people work toward being anti-racist? Is that something you could speak to us for just a moment?
Well, I could, but I'm not the expert on those terms because I don't use them. Okay. But a racist is a person or a group that does racist things. An anti-racist to me is a person or group that works against the process of those racist things and the people who are perpetrating those racist things. It to me is that simple. I don't think we get very far looking at these kinds of issues by trying to see what's inside somebody's psychology. To me, that's irrelevant. It's what they do. And so therefore, that's the way why I've explained it the way I did, which is not the current popular way of doing it. But I'm going to insist that we pay more attention to what's happening on the ground than what's happening inside anybody's mind.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. So it's our actions that really are what matters.
Right.
Thank you. Dr. Faulkner, one of your research focuses is on race and public policy. And in a recent interview, you stated, it's not enough for us to sit on the sidelines and hope and wish for things to get better. Like Dr. Reed said, we have to be active if we want to see any level of sustainable change. Could you outline some ways that we all, but especially whites who are interested in being engaged, can take action to drive public policy change for a more just and equitable society?
Yeah, I'll give a roadmap, so to speak, and I appreciate that question. For me, any action to produce racial justice has to focus on the 5 Ds, okay? We need to decenter, decolonize, disrupt, dismantle, and devise. What does all of that mean? The first step is to decenter whiteness. In our current race-based hierarchy, whiteness is the core of every policy decision. There is no decision that is made without regard to how it affects the positionality of those who are classified as white, and that has to stop. Second, you have to decolonize the institutional and organizational processes that you encounter. You do that by drawing attention to those racist policies and those racist practices. And then you undo the mechanisms used to colonize them in the first place. And then third, you disrupt the normal operations of white supremacy by whatever means are available to you. And it's at your discretion what tactics you feel are acceptable in doing that. For some, it is open and sustained protest. For others, it's advocacy or participation in electoral politics. For still others, it's grassroots organizing and community-based work. So only you can decide what are the acceptable tactics for disrupting white supremacy. And then fourth, we dismantle systems of power that perpetuate inequity, that exploit vulnerable communities, that cause harm to people based on their race. And this is often the hardest one for most because people tend to value stability. They value predictability often more times than they value justice. And white supremacy as a system can't be reformed. It has to be destroyed. And to do that, there are institutional pillars that have to come down. And that's scary for a lot of people. It pushes us out of the realm of predict and control into the realm of uncertainty. We don't always know how things are going to end up. We don't always know what it's going to look like. And that's how we get stuck. And that's why people continue to suffer. Oppressive systems have to be dismantled. And then finally, we devise with very careful thought, with sound ideologies. We have to start building organizations and systems and institutions that are just. We replace every lingering element of racism, and we make sure that the communities who have suffered for too long under this system are made whole. And that's a creative process. We have to be visionaries. We have to think about what our future looks like without a color-coded hierarchy of power and privilege. And so those are the things that we have to consider as we talk about what to do. What can we do? We shouldn't do anything without an appropriate framework.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking time to outline a prescription for what's ailing our country. So thank you for the 5 Ds, and I hope everyone will have a chance to think more about those and learn more about how we can be engaged. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, you've been engaged as a social justice educator beginning with your undergraduate years at Chowan University, where you served as the student body president, and then throughout your career at Ferrum, Norfolk State, Western Illinois, and now at Virginia Tech. We realize one of the most important ways to create a resilient community is to encourage courageous conversations. Based on your experience, how can we create opportunities and safe spaces for people to have such courageous, frank, and open conversations about race?
I do thank you for that question, and I do want to start off my part of the dialogue by saying this quote, which I recently found. I find it to be amazing and very powerful. What determines oppression is when a person is blocked from opportunities to self-develop, is excluded from full participation in society, does not have a certain right to the dominant group takes for granted, or is assigned as a second-class citizenship, not because individual talent, merit, or failure, but because of his or her membership in a particular group, category of people. For me, over the years, I've learned that you must begin with your internal work. Over the course of my practitioner career, I have seen where I have limited myself in exploring freedom. Amid society's current and long-standing violent unrest, I can only share one provocative thought for the listeners today. I have a new expression on life that freedom is available to everyone. Yet at the same exact moment, I too play a role in how another person experiences their freedom. I can recite, freedom is available to you, and at that exact moment, I cannot tell you what your freedom experience should be. There's enough space. That's your journey. First, you must recognize that you are a plausible vehicle for oppression and in turn can oppress someone else. To have access to this space, we must, as lifelong learners, understand that how we could contribute to oppression. There is an invisible revolving door following each and every one of us. So for these conversations to be courageous and brave, you must examine our internal conflicts and biases that we have with society and ourselves. It is an inward approach to an outward result. Granted, this process can be scary and invokes a new level of vulnerability. Yet there is a freedom on the other side of this experience. Next, we interrogate. The interrogation process I had with myself over the years uncovered trauma, forced me to reconcile with outdated practices and change. I am more comfortable with this evolution. We need to know that an anti-racist approach does not fully cover the spectrum of oppression. Any singular approach aimed to combat oppression will not suffice in this war. We must employ a transdisciplinary approach that includes ourselves as possible vehicles of oppression. I highly recommend that you extend yourself to understand the anti-oppression framework. Most notably, this framework has been targeted organizational structures that facilitate child welfare in Ontario, Canada. Anti-oppression can be defined as the lens through which one understands how race, gender, sexual orientation, identity, ability, age, class, occupation, and social service can result in systematic inequalities for groups. This framework focuses on both the process and the outcome, and a way to structuring relationships between individuals that is aimed to empower users by reducing the negative effects of hierarchy and the immediate interactions as we work together as we do this work. Finally, we dive deep into dialogue knowing that I am seeking but not limiting each other's freedom. These conversations must not be safe. They must be brave and courageous, exposing your implicit biases, challenging your personal and practitioner beliefs, reducing the amount of oppression that exists. Then we can be free.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. So for those folks who are really interested in diving deep into the issues that you've raised here, where would you tell them to start?
I would tell them to begin to see within themselves what they having difficulties about, what they don't understand. I know a lot of conversations that I have facilitated with and hosted was seeking why that person's point of view is like that, and what within myself am I disagreeing with or I might not have enough clarity on. I would recently finding out about the anti-oppression framework definitely helped me understand how society can function as an organization, how we as an organization can move around and see our place in oppressing another person. Also reading the anti-racist framework, that helped a lot as well, but understanding that was more work to be done. Understanding how I can minimize the ability of those who are around me in the concept of understanding sexism, homophobia, transphobia, the whole gamut of oppression that exists, being courageous in those conversations and speaking up. That's why I highly recommend those who are listening today to go in that direction.
Thank you. So seeking first to understand and to learn more about ourselves and others. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to respond. Mrs. Jones, as the Political Action Chair of the Montgomery County Radford City Floyd NAACP, you've been actively engaged in voter registration and education activities and probably have a better understanding than most of how the November 2020 election is fraught with challenges. Could you share with us your perspective on how you think we're going to be able to hold a just and equitable election this fall? Is it possible?
It's absolutely possible. And thank you so much for allowing me to share. So this year in Virginia will be really the first time that we have an entire election season that begins for us on September the 18th when no excuse in-person early voting begins. And a lot of registering voters that piece is easy. People want to vote. They understand that they need to vote. But the biggest piece in making this election season just and equitable is to make sure that everyone is educated, not just about the issues, but also about the process, because there are so many changes. In fact, right now, during the special session, we've seen additional changes to how, when, and where we can vote during this season. And so ensuring that we all know the, for lack of a better word, rules to voting, what you need, how to do it, but then making sure that we're educating our neighbors about that. In Montgomery County, we'll have 2 places that we can vote starting September 18th until October the 31st. Knowing what the rules are when you arrive, ensuring that you have the correct ID, but also being willing to step up and step in if someone is giving false or incorrect information, but also understanding what we have on the ballot this year, which is extremely important, as we also have 2 constitutional amendments that we'll see. And so our election will be just and equitable as much as everyone is educated on the process and what we can do. And my expectations, particularly here in Montgomery County and Radford, as well as in Floyd, is that every voter who is eligible to vote will be able to. Every voter that is eligible to vote has all the information at their fingertips that we can assist in that. And then we just want to make sure that everyone has that opportunity, particularly in this age of COVID. We want people to be able to vote in safe ways. And I think that we're able to provide that. And so for this election season, as long as we are educated on the process, I see that it will be an equitable opportunity for everyone to have that opportunity to cast a vote.
Thank you. Well, for our viewers who may not be in the Christiansburg, Montgomery area, and they'd like to learn more about how they can vote, where's a resource? Could you offer a resource or a place for them to visit to learn more?
Absolutely. So you can go to elections.virginia.gov. That gives a lot of information, but also our branch of the NAACP, we are hosting several instructional conversations that actually started last week through Election Day to ensure that people know what and how to vote. And so you can visit our website or our Facebook page at mrfnaacp.org.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work to help make this election just and equitable. Really appreciate it. So, another question that we also received that I think you would be a wonderful person to respond to is, how has the university worked with the towns of Blacksburg and Christiansburg to ensure the entire community is welcoming to those who are underrepresented? Have you seen some collaborative efforts there?
You know, this is a really interesting and good question. I'm happy to share, particularly as someone who has grown up here. This is my home. And so I've seen a lot of changes and a lot of the ways that our community has worked together, Christiansburg, Blacksburg, and the Virginia Tech community, and then ways that maybe we could have done things better as I've seen different people come and go. I think that together we have worked to make sure that everyone feels safe, have created opportunities for dialogue between the town community members as well as the Virginia Tech community. And I also see that we continue those conversations even when they're really, really difficult. And I think that everyone on this panel and those listening know when those conversations have been difficult, but we have, I think, strived really hard to work together as a community so that everyone feels welcome, everyone's voices are heard.
Thank you. I appreciate you helping with that question. So Chief Babb, you know we've received lots of questions about policing, and with your 30 years of experience as a police officer and having earned numerous awards for your service, as you've witnessed the recent protests, could you share with us how you have prepared the Virginia Tech police force to respond to incidents that might be heightened by racial tensions?
Yes, and thank you, Julie, and I appreciate you guys inviting me to be on this panel. I'm very proud of our police department, and in answer to your question, that preparation started a long time ago, and for agencies that didn't start kind of reaching out or trying to connect with their communities, probably most people are familiar with the term community policing, but just the importance of making connections before you reach kind of critical points is the best thing that any agency can do. And that started well before I got here in 2015. And so I will give the previous leaders of the police department all the credit in the world for the direction and path they put the Virginia Tech Police Department on, and hope that I've lived up to the standards that they set. Our agency is built and continues to kind of espouse the philosophy that we believe that we're an integral part of this community and of the educational environment. I tell my officers I have 3 primary kind of goals or objectives for them: the safety and security of the campus, because if we perform our very base function, people should feel safe on this campus and are able to perform their primary function or goal, which is to learn and get a quality education. Our second goal is about community outreach, again, kind of creating those connections and make sure that we aren't missing opportunities to connect, whether collectively in a forum such as this, or even on an individual level where we can make a connection with even one person to try and make the difference. And finally, the employee development piece, which I believe is, as long as we're continuing to make ourselves better, the campus benefits from that. Specific to this, again, we like to be seen as a resource. Many people look at law enforcement as kind of the keepers of the boundaries, which at times we have to be. But we like to be seen as a resource. And even if it's not a police issue, I tell my people that you should really try to solve whatever problem comes to you, even if we don't have the answers. Again, trying to get the person to where they need to be. Specific to this particular conversation, some of the things that we had previously done prior to the most recent elevation in a national dialogue were conversations on bias-based policing, conversations on implicit bias. One of the initiatives that was already in place when I got here is sending officers through crisis intervention training, or CIT, which is a kind of a national program. It's very personalized for this region. Making sure that our officers are have good communication skills for people in crisis, which translates into good communication skills even outside of crisis. And one other thing, I recently just sent 2 officers to a train-the-trainer school on de-escalation so that we can have a better in-house capability to develop our communication skills. And that's in addition to other training that we have gotten from outside the department. As the conversation, of course, escalated after the George Floyd killing, internally, there were a lot of discussions, certainly. I made sure and encouraged my officers to do their own research and educate themselves outside of what I would call common law enforcement publications or discussions, because they tend to have a law enforcement centric view when they discuss national topics. So I wanted to make sure that our officers were kind of fully immersing themselves in what the conversations might be and understanding. We've sent out information at shift levels. We've had monthly meetings this summer, shift training meetings where we discussed kind of the national issues that were evolving, what they mean. We've talked about kind of movements like the Campaign Zero project and the 8 Can't Wait project regarding use of force campaigns, to make sure that our officers were not afraid to communicate with the community members, which is kind of the other part that I really kind of emphasize to our officers, is that now is the absolute worst time for us to kind of retreat from conversation. We have to be involved, and we have to have these same courageous conversations as we've talked about for this session, for there to be understanding. And I think there is a very large gap as far as misunderstanding of police practice versus what the community perceives our practices to be. And we have to be involved in those conversations. More importantly, I've encouraged our officers to listen. Law enforcement historically has a very bad reputation for showing up at a community meeting and telling the community what their problem is. And we may hear something and say, well, okay, that makes sense, but here's what your real problem is. And then we would go about and solve the problem that we perceived, rather than what somebody told us directly is the problem. And that's been recognized and discussed, and agencies try very hard not to fall in that gap. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But it's something that starts with the very basic premise of you have to be willing to listen to the conversation. I did release an external statement to the community, kind of reaffirming our stance on law enforcement here in the community. That was twofold. One, because I needed the community to hear it from me that we are committed to fair and equitable law enforcement in this community, and we are partners with the community. And twofold, or the second is I needed my officers to focus again on here's what we do for our community. There's a national dialogue. We will play a part in that, but we can't make a mistake. We can't be the next national piece to this conversation. I released an internal statement, again, for conversation amongst our officers, very clearly laying out, thoughts on the George Floyd incident and, some very clear things, even without all of the information that they could point to and say, this is wrong, which should have given them the ability to look at it under their own lens and feel comfortable critically analyzing as a police officer and identifying the things that were wrong. But most importantly in that statement, one of the things I said is as we watch what's going on nationwide, it's very important that our officers not take the anger that they are seeing directed at law enforcement personally. We have to acknowledge that the anger is there. Excuse me. We have to acknowledge that there's a historical basis for it. Talking too much. And we have to acknowledge that law enforcement played a part in that history. So when an officer has somebody standing in front of them screaming and yelling and cursing at them, and the officer personally knows this is how I've conducted myself, they can't just dismiss the conversation as this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They have to acknowledge that the anger is there in order for the conversation to continue on. So those are kind of the things that we have worked through to make sure that our officers were prepared for the students to come back. We have met with some of the Black organizations on campus to try and initiate additional conversations. That is an area that we struggle with because of the university community and the fact that it turns over so frequently. We will get good connections with organizations and then leadership will graduate and we have to start over, and that's a known problem that we have to work through. But we made those connections and are continuing with those discussions to make sure that we are progressing forward to a positive outcome for our community.
Well, thank you, Chief Babb, and we're certainly lucky to have someone with your experience leading the helm at this time. In our call for questions to the panel, we did receive a question that brings the what's happening nationwide more local. And so the question is regarding why Blacks are more likely to be stopped, detained, or questioned by police than whites. And we received a request to display and discuss statistics on stops and arrests in Blacksburg, Christiansburg, and Montgomery County as a whole, analyzed by race and suspected or actual offense. And so Dr. Reed has agreed to share this information and provide some context about area statistics, but also to those across the nation. So thank you, Dr. Reed, for agreeing to respond to this request.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can pull this up. And so that's the context of what I'm about to show. I'm going to show two sets of data, and don't even bother to look at the date because the data, we look at it every year and it hasn't changed. I just happen to have these on PowerPoint slides already. And so what we do, I'm presuming everybody can see all of that. I can't. Yeah, now I can. Okay, and so we have this data that I'm showing you now is provided by the chiefs. It was provided in 2013, 2014, and it's similar the last several years in that Blacks are arrested in Blacksburg at about twice that rate in the population. Okay. In Christiansburg, nearly the same. Just look at this line. Blacks, 6.2% of the population, arrested 11.9% of the arrests, which is almost twice the rate they are in the population. And in the county, the sheriff's office, is more than twice. Okay. So the problem that we had initially is that many community people on our law enforcement issue group said, okay, there it is. We see that this is unfair, racial profiling, and a lot of other things. And the issue was that we couldn't demonstrate that these arrests were not warranted. None of us believed that they were, but we couldn't definitively demonstrate that. So what we decided to do was to begin to look at some data that we could use and discuss definitively. And that was police stops of motorists by race. And this was because I and a colleague had done a book on racial profiling. Okay, and so what we did, and to the credit of the police departments in Montgomery County, Blacksburg Police Department, the Christiansburg Police Department, and the Sheriff's Office, they all agreed to do something that was not being done anywhere else in Virginia, and that was to collect all of the demographic data on each stop of a motorist. Okay. And so I'm going to ask you just to look at what I point to. So that's whites, blacks, and Asian Pacific Islanders. Blacks, 4.3% of the population of Blacksburg, 7.3% of the stops. Now, this is more recent data, but it's similar to what we've experienced the last 10 years. Okay. Not many vehicles were searched, but we had the same percentage of searches that we did of the traffic stops. Now, one of the things that kept us from jumping all over the police at the time was this data over here. Blacks were much less likely to get a ticket after being stopped than whites. Much less likely. They were more likely to get a warning. Okay. Christiansburg, the same thing. Blacks, 6.2% of this town. Okay, and they're 8.9% of the traffic stops. That means they were stopped like almost 50% more often than they should have been. Okay. In the county, I'm going through this fast, so please just follow what I'm pointing out, because that's the most salient information for the question asked. It's blacks, 4% of the county, 9.7% of the traffic stops. So deputies from the sheriff's office stop blacks more than twice as likely as they should. Now, why? We have been analyzing this data, I mean, kind of ferociously. I've involved several people from Virginia Tech to help me try to analyze it, because the usual kind of things that we see, we don't see here. For example, one of the ways we can clearly point out and be absolutely certain of police racial profiling is if there are more blacks stopped in the daytime than at night. In Montgomery County, they're not. Okay. And so we're trying to figure this out. And we are going back and forth with it. And then we hit a snag in some of the data. And once again, I can argue that Virginia Tech people, the IT people have stepped in and volunteered to help us try to straighten the data out. So we've been hung up for several months because of the nature of the data. But we haven't been able to definitively say that it's racial profiling. I argue with the chiefs that if we can't find a reason for the stops, then we can conclude that racial profiling is going on. So we've stopped just short of that for now. So come back to us in another year, because last spring in the state legislature, a law was passed that required all police departments to collect this data, not just in Montgomery County. And they added 1 or 2 other data items that we think are going to be useful for us to answer that question. So this is a question that's open, but you see the data and you can have your own theories about what it means.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that data. And we will look forward to learning more as you get a chance to further analyze it. I was looking through our questions that have been submitted to us, and as we're in the process of talking about policing, one of our participants asked that the panel discuss the hate crime that occurred during the Gobbler Fest meeting on September 4th, the progress in the investigation and actions the university will take to better protect Black students moving forward. Chief Babb, is that a question that you're able to speak to?
I can probably provide a very surface level answer to that. We do take that seriously. That was obviously the second event that involved kind of hate speech. The first being actual speech that was documented in a chat room. And then subsequently during Gobbler Fest, several people signing in that expressed a lot of racial slurs, really going after the people that were signed in for a very good purpose. We are working closely with our IT security people to try and determine where the people were that signed in. As you can imagine, that involves a lot of tracing down IP addresses and where they are in the world, which is a very time-consuming process. So the investigation itself is ongoing. We're working with not only IT, but our Dean of Students to make sure that, if we were to find that it is Virginia Tech participation in that, there are consequences that could occur there. Outside of that, of course, probably many people saw on VT News where there was kind of a heightened educational campaign about how to protect Zoom meetings, kind of making sure that people understand the technical piece so that this kind of activity doesn't continue to happen. And then, of course, there is the offer of kind of support resources for the people that were directly affected by the racial slurs and language that were expressed during that Zoom meeting. It would be great if we could absolutely have an open session and people show up for the purpose of the session. But as been demonstrated, there are some people that are sharing information, probably in open panels, that is allowing people throughout the world to see how to get into these meetings. So we will continue to try and refine our processes and work with our partners to make sure that these events don't happen, so our students can do what they're here to do and enjoy the experience that they are having, COVID aside.
Thank you, Chief Babb. Well, and as you are aware, there are a lot of folks who are really interested in finding ways that they can show their support for Black Lives Matters movement and for all communities of color. So I'm hoping that both you and Dr. Reed could offer some brief advice to those who wish to lead or participate in demonstrations of support.
I'll respond first. The most prominent way that I know for local people is the dialogue on race, the Montgomery County dialogue on race. So just look up our website. We have everything there, including how you can contribute funds. Okay, and we have a list of the things that we are working on. We have a list of the things that we've done recently. We have a list of how you can be involved or get involved in any of the things we're doing. And let me just quickly say, dialogue on race is a misnomer. We started out 10 or 12 years ago with that as a name. We're going to have a dialogue so we can see what we're going to do about race. And once we started working, the name stuck, and try as I might, I could not get it changed because the public didn't accept it. So we are the dialogue on race. And so those people who think we just talk will just have to think that, because that's not what we do. We talk about what we're going to do next and evaluate what we've just done. So we are about action. All of our talk is about action. So dialogue on race is a misnomer.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks for sharing that resource, the Montgomery County Dialogue on Race. Thank you.
Yes.
And Chief Babb, do you have some advice you'd like to offer?
Yes, you know, on this subject, you know, the university does have a policy 5000 as far as how students can express their views or how we can run events. Many people find that to be an obstacle, but they should recognize that the university is supportive of freedom of speech. There are code sections within the Virginia, or the Code of Virginia, that protect freedom of speech. And the police department, while we are university officials and capable of enforcing university rules, we are more interested in, you know, the Constitution and people's ability to have the ability to safely express their opinions. So my advice always is, and this has been our practice when we find out that people would like to protest or have an event, is to partner with us. We will always make sure that the person is educated about policy 5000, but ultimately what we're more interested in are, what are you trying to accomplish and how can we help you do it? You know, if it's going to be something that's going to involve moving large amounts of people from, you know, one side of the drill field to the other, but they cross streets, can we assist in traffic control so nobody gets hit? Are there any concerns of the group that we can help you address? Do you expect counter protests? And should we prepare for those? Those are kind of my key points as far as, you know, trying to let us work with you, you know, in order for you to properly express your First Amendment views. We're a resource. There are some things, again, I think there's a wide kind of gap in understanding of police practice and what things mean versus the reality. So we can be a discussion point again, maybe to refine a message. So again, much like I said in my opening statement, is we want to be seen as a resource. We never want students to believe that we are here to stop them from effectively voicing their opinions and you know, expressing their First Amendment rights. So whatever we can do to facilitate that in a safe manner, that's what we're here for.
Thank you, Chief Babb. Ms. Jones, I know Dr. Reed has already told us about the Montgomery County Dialogue on Race, but I know you also are extensively involved in community engagement activities. And so I want to share a question that we received that's probably something that many people are interested in learning. And so this question reads, I'm 78 years old and have considered myself anti-racist my whole life. As I read, discuss, and think deeply about the issues, I realize that I have been open and welcoming, but I have never actively engaged in any way to help address the issue. I'm struggling with how to do that to effectively combat racism. My question is, how do I become engaged in a meaningful way?
So this is, I've been thinking about this question that you shared it, and it's a little difficult for me to answer because meaningful could have a lot of different meanings to that. I think Dr. Faulkner alluded to before in thinking about activism and how you engage. People can do that in different ways, in the ways that they feel are most effective for them. But I think one of the things that come with age, as a 78-year-old person, sometimes you get the floor and people have to listen to you no matter what, because that's what we do with our elders, we listen. And I think though, there comes a time when you have to be ready to have uncomfortable conversations with your friends, your family, and your neighbors, that even though as an individual, you have always considered yourself to be open, that does not mean that people around you have always felt that way. And I think the most meaningful way that you can be engaged is to start using your voice in whatever way that is most comfortable for you, whether it's calling it out when you see it, having those uncomfortable conversations with, and particularly sometimes it's more with family members than even friends, that you have to confront what is happening. But then also the more that you're educated on the issues, I think I like what Dr. Reed says when he talks about not trying to change people's hearts or minds, but it's about the policies. So understanding those policies when it relates to laws or policies and procedures that happen in our communities, that you are on the side that is making substantial change, so that going forward, the generations after us will have a more equitable society. And so I think being open and ready to have those uncomfortable conversations when you're in that voting booth and nobody is watching what you're doing, voting what I would consider to be the right way. And if you ever question which way is the right way, you can call me and I'll let you know what that is. But I think those are the ways that you can be more meaningfully engaged.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones. Appreciate that. So Dr. Faulkner and Dr. Williams, we also received a question I believe you can help us understand. Though we recognize that the black-white binary is currently the prevailing frame of discussion about race, we also know it's important that we recognize discrimination based on race and ethnicity is complicated and affects all people of color. So we'd appreciate your response to this question that we received. I've been looking and reading everything out there about racism, but I'm finding that the topics are all about BLM, African Americans, and I am concerned that the rest of whom the racism topics should be about are being left out: American Indians, Asian Americans, etc. I'm concerned that we are getting away from all lives matter.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer some thoughts on that question, but I want to see if Dr. Williams would like to speak before me.
You can go ahead. You can go first.
Okay. Okay. Well, for me, the last part of that, if I understood it correctly, I'm concerned that we're getting away from all lives matter. My response is, I hope so. I absolutely hope that is the case, because when we think about how this idea of all lives matter has come to the forefront of the discussion, it is a reactionary response to those who are saying emphatically that it is Black lives that have been neglected. Black people have a very unique position in this country. When we look at the system of chattel slavery that existed for 300 plus years, it was a system that enslaved Black people specifically and relegated them to a place of legalized inferiority long before we were discussing ethnicities. Even when we look at our current racial hierarchy and the people who invented them, folks like Linnaeus and Blumenbach and Bernier, primarily they place white people at the top of the hierarchy and then Black or African at the very bottom, noting that everyone else falls somewhere in between based on their proximity to whiteness. So in other words, this system was specifically set up as an attack on Black people. Now that doesn't mean that other races and ethnicities haven't suffered oppression as well. It also doesn't mean that other types of oppression aren't co-occurring. They certainly are, but the historical key is anti-Blackness. And in fact, other groups that are designated as of color have often been complicit in that anti-Blackness. because of their proximity to whiteness. So I think it's okay to acknowledge that there is a significant difference, while also acknowledging that other non-white people can and have been subject to racism as well. I don't participate in the Struggle Olympics. Okay, so I don't get into this ranking of oppressions and who has it worse and why it's that way. My focus is on ending it wherever it exists, and particularly on ending the system of white supremacy, a system that operates in every single area of activity and at all times. So for those who are interested in ending that system specifically, I think that's important to tell your stories, tell your narratives. If you believe that there isn't enough that's being written about other types of oppression, then you have to advocate for that type of scholarship or those types of experiences to be shared, because that is certainly what many groups have done. So I think that's the best way that I can answer that question.
Thank you.
Of course.
In addition to what Dr. Faulkner has already said, I too was concerned about this broad brushstroke that's often said with All Lives Matter movement in trying to use this approach to heal every diverse form of systemic oppression that exists. I think that reading about racism, in my opinion, will not heal the Native American or Asian American community when they have their own variation of oppression that they're experiencing. Racism is inextricably tied to the capitalistic and dehumanization of Black bodies.
Yes.
So understanding that approach, you're going to enter in that space seeing how Black people are affected by this. And it takes a lot of reading, it takes a lot of understanding, and also having the willing heart to know that every experience is going to be different. Every community, every generational, every conversation is going to be different. So if you're trying to say that all lives matter, and I'm concerned that one focus is over here and not the other, then I think you're saying the wrong thing. If you're going to say all lives matter, I need for you to go to all lives and see how they matter in their own way. You cannot dictate and say all lives matters to me and this is how I'm going to treat you. I need to know how you're going to be treated in this situation. So it's a long conversation. It's a lifelong journey to understand how am I going to do my part in minimizing oppression. How am I going to take that journey? How am I going to understand myself and moving forward? I definitely recommend you engage in these conversations with diverse dialogues across the generational span to see what we can all do.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Faulkner and Dr. Williams, for helping us have a better understanding of this bigger picture and what the Black Lives Matter movement means. So, Dr. Faulkner, there is a question that was posed specifically for you, that is, since the recent racial uprisings across the country, how has this impacted your interactions with your white colleagues? How have you observed an increase? Have you observed an increase or decrease in intellectually honest dialogue on race departmentally?
Yeah, of course. There is no way to be in this system and not be affected by it, especially when it comes to discussions like this with colleagues and with students and with anyone who is participating in a space. And that's part of experiencing the system, right? And it didn't just happen, right? So the conversations that I'm having right now with colleagues are conversations that I've been having since I walked on this campus. So none of this is new to me. As far as the intellectual honesty being part of that landscape, it depends. I have been part of conversations in which colleagues have been very open and very honest about their views, about the things that they're doing, about the things that they're willing to do, about their lack of understanding, and about the things that they have done. In other spaces, it's the elephant in the room. And even as they talk about it, it is not an honest conversation. So it just depends on who's around often and their proximity to power, usually, and what the person feels will be the consequence of their comments. So that's been my experience, but I will reiterate, it is not just in this current situation. This has been happening since day one.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking time to respond to that.
Sure.
Chief Babb, I know that we've received a lot of questions on policing, and as you're aware, there's been a cry to defund police, and we've received several questions related to that issue, including one that we will share that specifically addresses the VT police force. And the question is, while we are experiencing a mass uprising calling to defund the police, why did Virginia Tech expand its police force and break solidarity with the Black Lives Matter organizers rather than defund the police?
Thank you. I'll kind of address that in two parts. One on a technical note. It's, certainly I can't necessarily impact the impression that we broke with Black Lives Matters organizers, but as a technical note, the Virginia Tech Police Department's last really large incremental increase occurred after the events of 4/16. Since I've been here in the last 5 years, I believe we've managed under a critical needs request to add 3 officers, but in the same process, it's been kind of a back and forth process. So ultimately, I think even since I've been here, our net gain has only been either 1 or 2 officers over a 5-year period. Staffing is what drives those increases for any agency to engage in community policing. Community policing is very personnel driven. You have to have people to engage in all of the programs that we put forward for our community in order to meet kind of the basic safety and security requirements, the patrolling, the call response, things of that nature, and do the outreach and programming. So just, as a technical note, there really has not been a significant expanse of the Virginia Tech Police Department since I've been here. With specific discussion about the defund the police movement, of course, that has been a national outcry. There are very varying discussions about defunding and disbanding, which are 2 significantly different things. Defunding a lot of times refers to taking money from one program and moving it to another. I mentioned the conversations that I had during training with our officers over the summer. 2 of the major areas that come out of that are a lot of times response to crisis situations that aren't violent, domestic violence, things of that nature, and mental health calls, which police often find themselves as the primary responders for these types of calls. Admittedly, we are not the experts. We are not certified counselors. So there are probably better models that could be used in order to respond to people in crisis, people who need counseling. The problem, of course, comes in if you just defund the police with the expectation that you're going to take X amount of dollars, 25%, whatever the jurisdiction decides they're going to do. That's fine, except there has to be a mechanism to catch the people that the police were serving. And if the mechanism isn't there, isn't prepared to receive what the police were doing for the community, then you're going to have people suffer. The reason why police departments respond to domestic violence incidents and or just general domestic incidents and mental health is because the structures aren't in place to regularly meet all of the demands in these areas. And in some cases, they do turn violent, which results in the need for law enforcement to be involved, which also means even if the police don't respond, they have to be prepared to respond. So, that is certainly a conversation as far as life moves forward. I am sure it will stay in the forefront as to where are some better things that we could use money for. When departments begin to cut funding back, a lot of times what we lose are people and resources. And the things that get cut initially are programming, because programming costs money. And you go back to kind of your base duties, which are, the protection and enforcement of laws in the community. That cuts out that community outreach effort, which really severs vital links between law enforcement and the community, which again, kind of broadens that gap of misunderstanding between the community and the police. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Babb. There's a related question regarding the Threat Assessment Task Force that states, given how the Black Lives Matter movement challenges narratives of if you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide when it comes to police surveillance, what steps are being taken to increase transparency over the Threat Assessment Task Force and make sure that it isn't racially discriminatory?
So here would be a good example of kind of a misunderstanding of a particular program. The Threat Assessment Team was created through the Code of Virginia at the same time they created the Campus and Workplace Violence Prevention Committee. So it is created by law. All universities have to have one. It is chaired by the police department, but that's not a model that all universities use. And we are one piece in a number of pieces of that particular committee. Generally, what the threat assessment team looks at are individual and collective threats to the university that are referred to the team itself for evaluation. So at its very base nature, what we tell our community is this: if you have a moment where you say, if this may be nothing but, which we all have, chances are you're right. But if something were to go sideways, somebody get hurt as a result of that one piece of information that you had but chose to hold on to, that would be a heavy burden to bear. So we encourage the community to report information. It's not a black mark on anybody's record. The university takes a look at it. There are a number of partners in that group. So when we talk about the transparency, or at least the systems that are in place, the design of the threat assessment team itself protects against what you're describing. There are representatives from the student affairs, student conduct, the registrar's office, Cook Counseling is represented there, the dean of students is represented there, police, and we have legal representation there, all of which are weighing in on any referral that comes before the threat assessment team, up to and including, should this even be here? Like any process, law enforcement, that's one of the things that law enforcement struggles with is if you get a call and it's very clearly a racially profile driven call, there's a person in my neighborhood that doesn't belong here. Do you have to go? Typically the answer is yes, because what if they're committing a crime or something like that? Same thing with the threat assessment. They get the information, they review it kind of on all levels and decide whether or not or where the most appropriate university response is. Many times those types of responses are dealt with by multiple departments within the threat assessment team. There are some issues that they look at and they say, we understand why it's a concern, but it's really not a threat to the university, and those cases are set aside. But the protection comes kind of within the partners themselves, each having kind of an equal seat at the table to evaluate and look at all of the referrals that are submitted to the group itself.
Thank you. Thanks for helping us understand that process. We're quickly running out of time, but I did want to throw one more question to Ms. Jones. We had a question from someone who's interested in hearing about the constitutional amendments in terms of their relevance to our topic today, if there is such.
Well, actually, the most important one there's a redistricting amendment that will be on the ballot. That is going to be very important. Something that understanding what voting yay or nay for that means and its repercussions and what that's going to mean for the Commonwealth. And we are actually going to have a program very specifically geared toward that so that you can learn more about the constitutional amendment on September the 20th. And I would encourage anyone to take part in that. Redistricting, ending gerrymandering is something important that needs to happen, but what that looks like is also really important. And so understanding what that amendment will and won't do is going to be important. So we're going to do, our branch will have an entire program just about that amendment.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, our time is about to end, and we apologize that we're not able to get to all of the questions today. I did want to allow just a moment that if our panelists have reviewed the questions that have been submitted, and if anyone would like to respond to any of the questions that have been submitted before we turn it over to Dr. Christie for some closing remarks. So as they review, I just do want to thank everyone who has been a part of this conversation today. I want to thank Dr. Ghosh, Dr. Christie, and all the administration of Outreach and International Affairs for organizing this important conversation. And I want to thank our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your perspectives today. So Dr. Williams, Dr. Faulkner, Ms. Jones, Chief Babb, and Dr. Reed. We really do appreciate your thoughtfulness and your inspiring comments. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us today for the webinar. And I'd like to encourage you to take advantage of the resources that were listed at the beginning of the chat, as well as those resources that have been mentioned from by our panelists. And we hope you'll continue to have meaningful dialogues with your family, your friends, and your colleagues, and seek answers to the questions that you have, and seek those opportunities to learn and reflect on our own personal biases and where we need to grow and to help learn from others. So I'm going to now turn the program, if there's no one else that has something they'd like to respond to, I'll turn the program back over to Dr. Christie for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Hi. Okay, well, really all I wanted to say is to thank everybody for joining us today. We had a great discussion. So thank you to our 5 panelists and our moderator, Julie Walters Steele, and to the rest of the folks from all over that have joined us. I also wanted to thank Susan Short, Don Hempson, and Jane Swan and the leadership of OIA, who together with Guru Ghosh for their work and commitment and planning and coordination of the OIA Inclusion and Diversity Initiatives. We've been meeting regularly, but every week since the beginning of June, and have a lot of things going. Today, we've covered a wide range of issues in a very short time: community and campus concerns from Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter, bias in policing, defunding the police, difficult conversations. Really only scratching the surface, and encourage everybody to take to heart a lot of the things that have been said and follow up. Our goal with the OIA conversations was to learn from our collective conversation. We believe holding courageous conversations on racism is key to community resilience, as Julie said earlier. We did not expect to resolve issues of systemic racism and injustice and white supremacy and policing in 90 minutes, and we knew we would not have time to get to all the questions, so I'm surprised that we did get to a lot of them. I'm very sorry for the ones we were not able to get to. And I encourage you to reach out to some of these experts on some of the pending issues as well. But the OIA conversations are meant to spur reflection, learning, and continuing dialogue surrounding systemic racism in our communities across the Commonwealth and around the globe, and we hope we achieve that. Now, while this focus of this conversation was on the black-white binary, our future conversations will address systemic racism, justice, and community resilience in the broader context of communities of color. We'll have different topics and regions, including the Africa-focused one in November. So we hope you'll join us for future conversations, including the one on November 12th with our 4 African faculty at Virginia Tech. And we will follow up and send you a link to register for that. The last thing I'd like to do is ask you to please take a few minutes to share your thoughts with us on a short survey. We'll be sending that link right out after this, and we will take those to heart. So again, thank you very much for everybody, and appreciate you all. Be well.